My wife called me to a product launch party. Just try not to embarrass me in front of the media, she snapped. That's him? Oh, I thought he'd be taller. Minutes passed. I walked on stage uninvited. The room fell silent. Then they started clapping. A 47 male was married to a high-powered corporate woman, a 45-year-old female who spent the last decade climbing the ladder at a major tech firm. Somewhere along the line, I went from being her partner to her placeholder. She had a big product launch for her company in downtown Asheville, and I, being the loving, supportive husband, showed up. She asked me not to embarrass her. That was the only thing she said to me that day with any real feeling in her voice. Then I heard someone in the crowd say, "That's him? Oh, I thought he'd be taller." What happened next changed the trajectory of my life completely. My name's Bram. I've been a city worker most of my adult life. I'm the guy who shows up when your HVAC won't start in the middle of a January freeze or your pipes burst right before Thanksgiving dinner. Not glamorous, but real work. Work that makes things function. My wife, Rena, on the other hand, was always chasing something bigger. She started in comms at a mid-sized firm and worked her way up to become the chief brand officer at Voxena, a startup that somehow made its name selling people on the idea that their voice mattered in tech, even though internally they had the diversity of a 1950s country club and treated blue-collar spouses like me as conversation landmines. Rena wasn't always like that. When we first met, she loved that I worked with my hands. Said it made me grounded, real. That was her favorite word for a while. Real. But over time, Real started looking too much like average. And average didn't fit into her vision board. At first, it was small things. She started redecorating the house without asking. We upgraded our modest kitchen into something out of an HGTV episode, even though I preferred the one we had before. She insisted we donate my dad's old tools when we renovated the garage because, as she put it, this space should be about the future, not the past. That one hurt. Eventually, her critiques expanded to me. My haircut, my flannel shirts, my boots. She stopped holding my hand in public. Started walking a few steps ahead. At dinners with her colleagues, I became Bram. He works in facilities. No detail, no pride. Just a checkbox on her arm for appearances. I tried to roll with it for a long time. I loved her. And when you love someone, you rationalize. You tell yourself maybe they're just stressed, or maybe you're being too sensitive. I told myself that for years. We have a daughter, Morgan. She's 14 now, smart as a whip, and picking up on more than I ever realized. She'd ask sometimes, "Are you and Mom okay?" And I'd lie through my teeth and say, "Yeah, we're just busy." Then came the product launch. It was a Thursday. I had worked an early shift fixing some burst pipes at an elementary school on the west side. I was tired, dirty, and not in the mood to stand around watching people drink artisanal cocktails while pretending to care about app integration. But when Rena called me that morning and said, "Can you come to the Voxena launch tonight? Just try not to embarrass me in front of the media," I felt something twist in my gut. It wasn't a request. It was an order. And I realized it had been that way for a long time. Still, I said yes. Because I was still that guy. The helper. The yes man. The invisible glue. So I cleaned up. Put on the nicest sport coat I owned. Polished the only shoes I had that weren't work boots. And showed up. The venue was a renovated industrial building turned tech haven. Sleek lights, projection walls, exposed brick, the works. Everyone there looked like they had a personal stylist. I felt like someone's dad who'd wandered in asking for directions. I spotted Rena across the room. She was surrounded by co-workers and media people. When she saw me, her face flickered. Not with happiness, but with apprehension. She pulled me aside. "Don't linger near the front," she said. "They're doing photos soon. Stay back, okay?" I nodded. Didn't say a word. That's when I heard it. A young woman in bright red heels and a man in designer glasses, standing maybe 15 feet away. She leaned in and said, "That's him? Oh, I thought he'd be taller." They both chuckled. The man muttered something else, but I didn't catch it. My ears were ringing. I stood there, humiliated, skin crawling, like I'd stepped outside my body and was watching myself be erased in real time. And then, something just snapped. I didn't plan it. I didn't think. I walked toward the stage, one foot in front of the other. I wasn't even sure what I was doing until I was up there, grabbing the mic that the COO had just adjusted on the podium. The room went quiet. I could see Rena's face in the back. Jaw slack. Eyes wide. I'd never seen her truly speechless before. "I wasn't invited to speak tonight," I said into the mic, voice dry but steady. "But I think I need to say a few things anyway." People laughed nervously, shifting in their shoes. "I know I don't look like most of you. I don't own a startup. I don't know what UX scaling integration means. I fix things. I make sure the stuff people forget about keeps working." Someone near the bar smirked, but no one interrupted. I was asked not to embarrass anyone tonight. That's what I've been doing for the past decade. Actually, trying not to embarrass someone I love by being who I am. You could have heard a pin drop. I continued, eyes scanning the crowd. But I'm not the one who should be embarrassed. I showed up. I supported. I stayed when I should have walked. I paid for dreams that didn't include me. and I stood quietly while people whispered things like, I thought he'd be taller. A few people looked around uncomfortably. Some nodded. I turned toward Rena. You asked me not to embarrass you. But Rena, what you should have said was, don't remind anyone I'm married to you. And you know what? Message received. Loud and clear. I handed the mic back to the COO, who looked like he might pass out, and walked off stage, straight out the side door and into the night air. I didn't go home right away. I walked. It was one of those chilly Asheville nights where the wind cuts a little too deep for April, but I didn't feel it. I walked past the neon-lit bars, the corner where Morgan and I used to get donuts on Saturday mornings, and the quiet library steps where Rena and I once sat for hours talking about the future. Funny thing about the future, it never really asked if I'd be coming along. I found myself outside a little bar I used to frequent before life got too complicated. The kind of place with creaky floors, local brews, and music that didn't come from a playlist curated for Instagram Reels. I sat at the bar, ordered a beer, and just sat. No phone, no texts, no pretending. The bartender, a guy named Louis I vaguely remembered, poured without comment. He looked like someone who understood when a man needed silence more than small talk. I thought about Morgan, about how she was growing up in a house where her father had been reduced to a background character. I thought about how many of her school events I'd gone to alone because Rena was networking or under deadline. I thought about how many times I'd made excuses for Rena, for her tone, her absence, her indifference. And suddenly, I wasn't angry. I was ashamed. Ashamed that I'd allowed myself to shrink to fit into her world. I stayed out until close. Didn't drink much, just nursed the one beer and watched the room shift around me. At one point, a guy sat next to me and started complaining about how his wife never let him touch the thermostat. I half listened, half wondered how many other men were out there, quietly fading into the wallpaper of their own lives. When I got home, the house was dark. Rena was asleep, or pretending to be. I didn't go into the bedroom. I laid down on the couch and stared at the ceiling until the first light started to creep in. The next morning, Morgan came down and saw me there. You okay? She asked. I nodded, even though I wasn't. She sat beside me, curling her legs underneath her like she used to when she was small. Mom's been freaking out since last night, she said. She told me you hijacked her event. I chuckled dryly. I suppose I did. She also said people clapped. They did. Morgan looked at me, quiet for a moment. I'm glad you said something. That surprised me. You are. Yeah. It's like, you finally showed them who you really are. That landed hard. Later that day, Rena cornered me in the kitchen. Her tone was sharp, but underneath it was something else. Uncertainty, maybe even fear. Do you have any idea what kind of damage you've done? She said. People are asking questions. Clients are calling. My name is trending on LinkedIn, Bram. You told me not to embarrass you, I said. But you've been embarrassed of me for years. I just stopped covering for you. She stared at me, stunned. Then came the tearless apology. The kind that sounds more like a press release than a confession. I never meant to make you feel small. But you did. She didn't reply, just walked off, muttering something about handling the PR fallout. That weekend, I started moving my things into the guest room. No dramatic announcement. No heated argument. Just a quiet rearrangement of space that had been happening emotionally for years. I started spending more time with Morgan. We went to local bookstores, hiked up craggy gardens, made awful pancakes from scratch. She opened up more. Told me she'd felt like she couldn't talk to either of us for a while because we were too busy pretending everything was fine. It hit me then. Silence in a house isn't peace. It's surrender. Meanwhile, the video from the product launch had taken a life of its own. Someone posted a clip on TikTok with the caption, "Real man stands up for himself in front of fake people." It hit 1 million views in 3 days. Then came the emails. At first, just strangers thanking me. Other men, women too, saying they felt seen. Then a few podcast invites. Then a message from a business consultant in Nashville who said, "You ever think about helping other guys like you find their voice?" It sounded like a joke, but it didn't feel like one. I met with him, talked about my background, the years I spent managing city crews, solving problems no one noticed until they exploded. About how many of the men I worked with were barely holding it together at home. About how dignity gets chipped away in small, daily increments until one day you realize it's gone. He asked me if I wanted to speak at a small conference. I said yes, even though I had no clue what I was doing. Turns out, I didn't need polish. I just needed truth. People responded. And while all this was happening, Rena drifted further into damage control. She tried to spin the launch night story, released a statement that implied I'd been having a mental health episode. That backfired. People didn't buy it. Some of her coworkers reached out to me privately to say they'd suspected things weren't right for a while. One woman wrote, "You're not the first man to be treated like an accessory at Voxenta, but you're the first one who said something." That email stuck with me. Things at home got colder, quieter. We stopped talking except about logistics. Morgan started spending weekends with me at my brother's place just outside Brevard. I started to breathe easier. Not because things were fixed, but because for the first time, they were real. The lawyer's office was tucked inside a nondescript building on the east side of town, just a few blocks from the courthouse. It was one of those gray spring mornings where everything looks slightly damp, the kind where the sky just hangs low and undecided. I sat across from a woman named Carlene, maybe mid-50s, sharp eyes, no nonsense. She'd been recommended by a friend from my city crew days. Said she handled quiet divorces with a surgeon's hand and a therapist's patience. We went over the basics. Timeline. Assets. Morgan. Carlene asked questions, took notes, and only paused once when I mentioned the refinancing. You refinanced the house to help your wife launch her company? Yeah, I said, trying to hide the embarrassment. She didn't have enough collateral on her own, so I used my pension account as a guarantee. She didn't say anything right away, just tapped her pen a few times and gave a little nod. Okay, she said. That'll matter. We'll document that thoroughly. It was strange. I'd walked into her office expecting to feel guilt, like I was doing something wrong by finally drawing a line. But I didn't. What I felt, honestly, was relief. Afterwards, I sat in my truck in the parking lot for a while. Just sat there. Watched people come and go from the offices around me. I wondered how many of them were quietly unraveling behind their daily errands. When I got home, Rena wasn't there. She was on a work trip, something about smoothing things over with a corporate partner out in Seattle. That used to bother me, her being gone so often. Now, I was grateful for the space. Morgan came home from school that afternoon with her earbuds in and her hoodie pulled halfway over her head. She dropped her backpack at the door, gave me a quick nod. Hey, I said. How was school? She shrugged. Fine. I waited a second. Want to do something tonight? Maybe get burgers? She paused, then pulled one earbud out. Yeah, sure. We ended up at this little place off Tunnel Road. One of those no-frills diners where the fries come in wax paper baskets and the tables are all a little sticky. We sat in a booth by the window, and I let her talk about school and her art class and this drama between two of her friends that I only half followed but pretended to understand. And then, out of nowhere, she looked at me and said, "You seem different lately." I blinked. Different how? Less tired. I don't know. Like, less invisible. I didn't know what to say to that. So I just smiled. Later that night, I got a text from Rena. It was short. I heard you've been talking to a lawyer. Can we discuss this before you do anything rash? That was her style. Always a little too late. Always framing everything like it was a misunderstanding instead of a pattern. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I walked out into the backyard and sat under the string lights I'd hung up years ago, the ones she used to call tacky. It was quiet. Peaceful. For once, it felt like my own space. I thought back to our early years, when she still laughed at my jokes, when she still touched my arm when we were out with friends, when we used to dream together instead of in parallel. That woman was long gone, and the truth was, I'd been mourning her for years without realizing it. A few days later, Rena returned. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table, each with a cup of coffee between us like some kind of neutral zone. She was dressed like she always was, put together, sleek, like someone auditioning for a lifestyle magazine. I was in my work clothes. Didn't bother to change. She sighed. So this is where we are. I nodded. It is. Can we at least try counseling? We should have tried that 5 years ago, I said. Before you stopped seeing me. She leaned back, arms crossed. You think I stopped seeing you. But maybe you stopped evolving. I swallowed that. Hard. I didn't stop evolving, Rena. I just didn't evolve into something you could show off at corporate dinners. That's not the same thing. She looked away, jaw tight. We sat in silence for a long time after that. The kind of silence that doesn't need to be filled because everything important has already been said. When she stood up, she didn't say anything else. Just left the room. That week, I started packing some things. Not out of spite, just practicality. I moved into a small rental on the edge of town. Nothing fancy, 2 bedrooms, old porch, creaky floorboards, but it felt like mine. Morgan split time between us at first, but over the following weeks, she began spending more time with me without even needing to talk about it. Rena never fought that. I think part of her understood. Work stayed steady, and the podcast invites kept coming in. I wasn't trying to be anything, just a guy who spoke honestly about being overlooked. Apparently, there were a lot of us out there. A man from Missouri emailed me one day. Said he played my clip from the launch party for his wife because he couldn't find the words himself. Another man said he'd filed for separation after years of emotional neglect and felt less alone after hearing my story. I'd never meant to start anything. But sometimes, speaking up is enough. Enough to shake something loose. Enough to remind people they're not crazy for wanting to be seen. There was a rhythm forming in the new place. Every morning, I'd make coffee the old-fashioned way. French press, kettle whistled water, a spoonful of brown sugar, and sit by the window as the sun cut through the blinds. It was quiet. Still, the kind of silence that doesn't press down on your chest, but lifts something off it. I started fixing things around the rental that didn't really need fixing. The loose cupboard hinge. The tilted mailbox. Replaced all the light bulbs with warm white LEDs because the cold blue ones felt like a hospital. I planted herbs on the back porch, not because I cook much, but because I miss the smell of fresh basil when the wind shifts. Morgan loved the place. Feels like a real home, she said one evening, curled up on the couch with her sketchpad. I turned down a few media requests. Said no to podcasts that wanted me to perform the heartbroken husband bit for clicks. I wasn't bitter, just done being a mascot for a marriage I'd already emotionally left behind. Rena reached out a few times, emails mostly. Businesslike, measured, distant. Let's review the custody schedule before school starts. Morgan mentioned you changed her dentist? Can we agree on a furniture list for division? There were no late-night calls, no emotional appeals, no last-minute confessions. That, somehow, was the most telling part. It wasn't just that we were ending. It was how little there was left to even grieve. One evening, I got a text from someone I hadn't heard from in a long time. Frank, a guy I used to work with back in my city crew days. We weren't close, but we'd spend enough nights in utility tunnels together to form that unspoken bond that comes from shared grime and silence. He'd seen the video. Said he was damn proud, which meant something coming from a man who never complimented anyone unless they'd nearly died doing something stupid. Let's grab a beer, he wrote. You need to be around real people. We met at a dive near the tracks. Cheap pictures, sticky tables, honest conversation. He asked me how I was really doing. I told him the truth. I don't miss her, I said. Not the her she became. He nodded, chewing on that like it was a piece of jerky. Good, he said. Because you know what I saw in that video? A guy who finally remembered he had a spine. I laughed. Took me long enough. He leaned in a bit. Yeah, well, a lot of us forget. Until someone else reminds us. The drive home that night felt different. Like something in me had finally snapped back into place. Not with a bang, but with a quiet, undeniable click. Morgan was asleep when I got in. I peeked into her room, saw her headphones half off, pencil still in her hand. She'd been sketching again. I glanced at the pad on her desk before I pulled the blanket over her. It was a drawing of me. Nothing fancy. Just me sitting on the porch, coffee in hand, face half in shadow. But she'd captured it. The stillness, the weight, the peace. I stared at that sketch for a long time. The next day, I sent an email to Rena's lawyer. Simple. To the point. Let's proceed. A few days later, Rena asked to meet. Neutral ground. A coffee shop downtown that she always liked. Sleek, minimalist, uncomfortable seats. She arrived in a pressed blazer, sunglasses on her head, and that same unreadable expression she always wore in meetings. I want to keep this amicable, she said. For Morgan's sake. I do too. I don't want to fight over things, she continued. I just want to wrap this up cleanly. That was her, always framing things like a business deal. But I wasn't there to pick a fight. I'm not interested in dragging this out, I said. I've already let go of more than most people would. She blinked, like that sentence had a sharp edge she wasn't expecting. There was a long pause. She looked down at her cup, then back up. Was I that bad? She asked, voice quieter than I'd heard in years. I didn't jump to comfort her. I didn't soften it. You stopped seeing me, I said. And I stopped pretending I was okay with that. She didn't cry, didn't argue, just nodded. And for a moment, I saw the woman I'd met all those years ago. The one who used to laugh too loud and talk about the stars like they were reachable. But that woman was a memory now. And memories aren't enough to build a life on. We finished our coffees and walked out. She went one way, I went the other. The divorce was finalized 6 weeks later. No courtroom drama. No name-calling or dirty tricks. Just signatures, documents, and the quiet dismantling of a marriage that had already been empty for years. I kept the small rental. Morgan chose to live with me full-time, which Rena didn't contest. It's temporary, she told her lawyer. Teenagers always change their mind. But Morgan didn't. She had no intention of going back. I think Rena thought her life would stabilize. That with the distraction of me out of the picture, she'd rebuild her image, maybe even rewrite the story. But something was different now. And not just between us, between her and the world. Turns out, people remembered what I said at the launch party. And they remembered how she responded, by trying to spin, minimize, deflect. The video lived on longer than anyone expected. It became one of those quiet hero moments that got shared when people were feeling stuck. Men's groups discussed it. Women who were tired of partners being emotionally erased talked about it. Therapists analyzed it on YouTube. I didn't make money from it. Didn't want to. But what I did get was something more lasting. I got to write my own narrative. That consulting opportunity? It grew. I started speaking at small business conferences, leadership retreats, even a couple of college classes. Not as some viral figure, but as a guy who reminded others not to disappear in service of someone else's spotlight. A few months after the divorce, Boxenta announced a major restructuring. They'd lost a few key clients. Some of them, I later learned, were quietly appalled by how the company had handled the PR after my speech. One firm pulled their contract and cited a values mismatch in a formal statement. Another restructured their brand relationship entirely. The media never made a big story out of it. But insiders knew. And Rena? She was quietly asked to step down from her CBO role. A mutual decision, of course. One of those polite corporate euphemisms for "you're bad for optics now." I didn't gloat, didn't post about it, didn't send a single message. But when Morgan came home from school one day and said, "Mom started working with a coaching firm for executives, says she's rebuilding," I just nodded. "Good for her," I said. Morgan looked at me for a beat. "She also said you torched her career." I raised an eyebrow. I didn't torch anything. I just stopped holding the ladder. And that was the truth. See, I never wanted revenge. Not really. I just wanted recognition, for myself, and for every person out there quietly holding together a relationship where they'd stopped being seen. But watching her tumble, not because I pushed her, but because she no longer had anyone propping her up, that was justice. Quiet, clean, and undeniable. The real win, though, was Morgan. She flourished in the months after the split. She started entering art competitions, opened a small Etsy shop for her prints, and even got her first summer internship with a local design firm. She told me once, while we were watching old home movies, "You coming out of that marriage, it showed me I don't have to shrink to make people comfortable." That, that was the real full circle moment. As for me, I built something new. The consulting grew into a proper practice. I started a podcast called The Undersaid, where I interviewed everyday folks, plumbers, nurses, teachers, single parents, about the things they'd swallowed for years and finally learned to voice. It didn't go viral. It didn't need to. It was honest. And it mattered to the right people. One night, a year after the divorce, I found myself back at that old bar. The one I wandered into after the launch party. Same creaky floors. Same bartender, Louis. He poured me a beer without a word. "You good?" he asked after a minute. I nodded. "Yeah," I said. "Really good." And I was. Because in the end, the best revenge wasn't destroying anything. It was rebuilding everything. But this time, for me. And the truth? Nothing embarrassed her more than the fact that I didn't need her to fall in order to rise. I just needed to walk off the stage and build my own.